Throughout his 50 plus years in golf course design, Tom Fazio has been recognized for creating award winning courses throughout the United States. No living designer has more credits on Golf Digest's list of America's 100 greatest golf courses and Golf Week's collection of America's 100 best modern courses. After winning the Golf Digest poll for Best Modern Day Golf Course Architect 3 consecutive times, that publication discontinued the award for lack of competition. Tom attributes his success to maintaining a team concept in design shared by his dedicated staff of design associates, many of whom have worked with Tom for anywhere from 30 to 40 plus years. This visionary group, with a diverse base of knowledge and united love for the game of golf, enables Fazio Design to continue to create courses that are noted throughout the industry for their excellence. Tom and his wife Sue have 6 grown children and 17 grandchildren. They're active in their community and support many organizations philanthropically. Tom and Sue founded the Boys and Girls Club of Henderson County, and they also support various children's causes with the Tom Fazio Children's Charity Fund, which benefits from fundraising endeavors such as Tom's book, Golf Course Designs. Welcome, Tom, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Thank you. Glad to be here and looking forward to it.
Tom, let's jump right in. What caused you to become interested in golf course design, and how did that interest evolve into a vocation and eventually starting your own golf course design business?
It's an obvious question, and I've been asked that a lot. And I find that sometimes I change that answer because I've said it so many times, and I just want to keep. I'm one of those kind of people that have a brain that's always thinking, and never want to be bored. So boredom is not for me. But it's an actual fact. I probably didn't have a choice. I grew up in a golf family. My uncle happened to be a tournament golfer in the Sam Snead, Ben Hogan era in the decade of just before World War II in the 40s and 50s. And for me, I started very young in a family that you had to work early. That's what you did. You didn't even complain. You just did it because that's what you had to do. Do as you're told to do. And that's what everybody kind of did that I knew and where I grew up. And so from a young age, that's just what I did. Did what I was told to do by my family, my father, and then my uncle. And after having roughly 18 years of a father, the next 20, I had an uncle who was my father in a different way. And so that's how I started. And I just became something I never thought about doing anything else. I do reminisce and go back and think about it when people ask me that question. When you're very young and a little kid, it used to be you want to be a fireman, a doctor, a policeman, or whatever. When I was a kid, that was kind of the choices when you were prior to being 10 years old. But then when I evolved into into high school, I could see that at the time that's what I needed to be doing was working for this family business, and that's how it evolved.
It's probably hard to imagine, but what do you think you would have done had you not become a golf course architect?
Again, I'm asked, and I think about that. It's such a piece of my being of doing what I do that I can't even imagine I would have done it. Now, I would have liked to have been because I like people. I'd like your job, maybe. I'd like to do something that relates to being around a lot of people, helping people. I kind of like being in charge, though, because I grew up and I'm in charge of everything until I'm around my wife. And then, I'm second position there, but it's good. I like doing what I'm doing.
Well, I'm so glad you ended up doing what you did. And obviously, you've made a big impact in the world with your courses. Tom, you've designed and built more than 200 courses over 5 decades, and we'll get into more detail on that. But how would you describe your philosophy or your approach to design, and I'm guessing that's evolved considerably through the decades.
True, it has evolved, and I look back and think back. Fortunately, my brain continues to be active and working, and sit around at times and think. I like to write notes and I go back. Uh, the numbers game for me bothers me a little bit relative to when you talk about age and numbers. It bothers me in the sense that you start doing the math and it sounds like this guy must really be old. Well, I don't think I'm ever going to get old. I'm going to die young because I think young, and so now I think not in terms of years. I think in decades. For when I started working with my uncle in the '60s, decade of the '60s. So now, when you do the math on that, there's many decades. I don't even count how many decades there are. There's just a lot of decades, and so I look back at all those, and it's amazing the progress of life. I look at my business and my personal life as to how do you deal with the conditions that we had to deal with. Growing up in the family I grew up, which was I had a brother, older brother. I still have an older brother, and my father was a blue collar worker. He was the oldest male of six brothers, and there were two girls. He had two sisters, and since he grew up in that Depression era prior to World War II, the oldest brother, the oldest son, was the worker, and he was the one who helped take care of the family and went out and went to work and helped support and take care of his family. Because that's what his parents told him to do, and that's what you automatically did in that era in time. And he did that, and I think I learned a lot from him. And you just go to work and you just produce and do the best you can do. And things were very different back in the '60s decade in terms of maybe the responsibilities were different, the liabilities in business and work were very different. And so I started off with a great opportunity at a very young age. By the time I was literally 19 years old, my uncle had me running a business, hiring people and signing the checks. And I was the guy who was in charge besides being in the field. And that was at 19 years old. So I kind of just grew up that way, and that's the way it was.
And so, how does that play into your approach to design? I've heard you say a couple things already. One, that you're going to die young, that you don't feel old at all, you feel young. I get the sense that you have this excitement about life, a passion for life, a curiosity. I think might be part of it too. So, how does that your background and the way that you've lived your life and the way that's evolved, how would you connect that with the way you design golf courses, if there is
Well,
a connection, or maybe that comes from something completely different?
Well, I think again it goes to that point of I'm always looking to the future. I'm always looking at uh, tomorrow. I'm always looking at next week and how do you do the best you can do to be in the position for the future, whether it's the immediate future, down the road future. And even at my age, I'm looking down the road. My age is, again, I think young. In fact, I've in the last year at my last birthday, I just knocked 10 years off and tell everybody I'm 10 years younger because I want to be. I think that way. Just why not? and but in terms of how it affected my business and design business, I think it goes to the fact, again, going back to those earlier decades. And if you go through the process of golf design and how even business related, how things have changed. But for me, it was um, doing the best each day, whatever the conditions were. And when I started in the industry, it was very different. Like most businesses, we started from the bottom. Now, how do you get from the bottom? I didn't go from the bottom to the top. I didn't win. Actually, I did win the lottery. I won the lottery when I was born. I mean, that day, that's because I was into this life that I evolved to, and somehow that happened. I look back and say, how did it happen? I don't know. But looking at the design back in those early decades, it was dedication and work, and it was even though it sounds like most old people will tell their children and young people, I worked and never took time off. I never did this, never did that, and only work, 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 work. That's usually exaggerated, mostly, although I did, but I loved what I was doing. It was what I knew what I was going to do. At least that's all I could do. Maybe in my brain, subconsciously, you just had to do what was in front of you, and so I just took that as a positive. And then you take the industry of doing the best you could do. And usually economics always rule, and no matter what business it is. It's not kind of nice to say. You like to think you're just a creator and a designer and you don't think about economics. That's not the real world. The real world is, what do you have to work with? What are the resources? That's capitalism at its finest form. That's what I believe in. And so you do the best you can for what you have to work with and the resources. And then as things changed, again, when I started in the golf design business, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was in the 400 to 500. And look where we are today. Maybe not today, but look where we were last month, a year or two ago. But still, it's changed and it's evolved. And I think we all, as people, tend to evolve and hopefully do the best we can do. And that also relates to from whatever industry you're in. And for me in golf design, it used to be in my early days, when you finished and completed a golf course, uh, hopefully you'd get an answer when someone looked at it like this: boy, that is really a wonderful golf course. Someday when that matures, it's going to be really good. Well, today that's failure. We've evolved to that where when you play a new golf course today, and how in the certain last couple of decades, it's being compared. That particular product is being compared to the best that someone has ever played. So the expectation now is, when a person walks off your new golf course, to say that's as good or as better than anything I've ever seen or played. Now there's a big difference between those early times and those late times. And how did that happen? Well, it happened through a lot of efforts by a lot of people in the industry itself and the economics. And of course, I think all of us expectation level has risen. Like, who would have thought we'd be driving a car that drives itself? Now, I don't trust that yet. I don't know if I'll take my hands off the wheel. Maybe my kids will probably do that, but I'm not sure I'm taking my hands off the wheel at any time soon. But look at the things we have, the sensors that are around cars. When somebody walks near them, and it's all wonderful, great things. As well as, and now that we get older, it's kind of nice to have a camera looking in the back. So since our bodies don't turn as easily as they did when we were younger, it's kind of nice to look in the camera and see what's behind you. So evolution of time and process and industry has allowed me to take and produce golf course, and everyone in the industry. We have a wonderful group of talented young designers and older designers, and we've all moved upscale to, again, it's the expectation. The people now expect it to be of the highest level from day one. So that just happened to be that way.
Well, and I think that's a testament to your success and longevity in the business too, that you've been willing and able to adapt to those changing times. And obviously, the world is different than it was even a couple years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, certainly 20 years ago or longer. And I commend you for being able to adapt to that. Tom, one of the things that I find really interesting is how different golf courses can be. And so you've designed, again, some 200 golf courses. And just to talk about a couple, for example, on one project, Shadow Creek Golf Club in Las Vegas, you moved more than 3 million cubic yards of earth around the desert floor to create this completely isolated, insulated golf experience. And then in a totally different type of project, Lake Nona Golf and Country Club in Orlando, the course is the centerpiece of this luxurious 600-acre residential development. And the residents aren't just run-of-the-mill novice golfers. They include dozens of PGA and LPGA tour professionals. Those are just two examples, and I'm sure every single project has its own story. I've read that you're really hands on, not only creating plans for each of the courses, but also overseeing much of the on site development as well. Walk us through, if you would, what a project looks like from start to finish, because I'm fascinated how you have the skill of being able to look at this piece of land, this blank canvas, if you will, visualize an 18-hole golf course, and then design and build some of the masterpieces that you've created.
Well, interesting enough, it usually starts before even looking at the land. It's usually a phone call from someone that says, I am thinking and planning to build a new project. Now, that project may be a private residential community, it may be a resort, a hotel, it could be a combination of many things, but that's kind of the idea. So now it's the process of evaluating and looking at the total picture. Uh, for me, the most important and what has evolved, again, going back in the earlier stages of my career, the piece of land was really important. That was maybe even a primary step, and that's how things have changed. Where the the and the reason for that was when you talked about having a wonderful golf environment, it usually started with having a good piece of land. And when if you do the study of that, it also gets back to economics. The better the land, the less manipulation you have to do to the land to produce golf to the best you can do. So, uh, and then we've evolved again over these decades of time. You could have in decades past and in the early days of golf design. And interesting enough, golf is only in America about, I call it 12 decades. Of golf, and there's a few more, but I take out a few of those pieces for World War I and World War II, and the depression of 30 when nothing happened. So it's really not that long a time. And if you do the study and the history of the evolution of golf in that time, you'll find how it has progressed. And it was at a point where there were no rules relative to environment, relative constraints for your property. Today, when someone has a piece of land, when we look at a map or we look at the setting, the first question you ask and the first question study that has to be done is an environmental assessment of the constraints of the site. In I don't particularly like this word in California. I call it the E word. You know, to me, the E word is entitlement. What is the government entitled to take from you? But bottom now, I don't get into politics, but bottom line, and I'm all for environmental constraints and environmental awareness. I'm involved in a company my son has got me involved in with renewable energy because I believe in it, and it's a big thing and it's a future thing. So I'm on that side of it. But on the golf side, this evaluation of the property as to what you can do and what you cannot do. What are the rules and regulation? Now, there's federal, there's state, and there's regional and local. So they have to be put into the equation. So now you take a big piece of land that looks like where do you start? You have 1,000 acres, pick a big number and say we're going to put golf and associated development, whatever that may be around it. Well, now you start drawing the lines of where you can't do anything. You cannot touch that land because of whatever the conditions may be. And there's endless possibilities there, whether it's endangered species, whether it's uh, burial grounds in the past, or whatever it may be. So you start putting that together. And now you wind up with the net acres that you're allowed to work with, whatever that may be, and depending on where it may be. Now, interesting thing about Las Vegas that you mentioned, that turned out to be a very easy project because there were no environmental issues. There were no environmental rules. We had a piece of land that was roughly 350 acres, and you could do whatever you want and no constraints. Interesting enough, that was easy. Fortunately, we had an owner who had a great vision and understanding, and also had the resources to do the implementation, to do the details to make that happen. But with this piece of land now that you've gone to the net acres you're allowed to use, you start looking at elevations, site conditions, and things like if it had a little thing like what makes a golf hole great. Generally, It's a frame, it's a definition, it's an environment, it's the setting of the elevations. And if a property has a stream on it, well, that's a very important key piece of maybe a potential where a golf hole could be. But we've evolved to the point in some states where we have regulations that you're not allowed to go near the stream within 50 feet of the edge of the stream. And no disturbance, no tree removal, no vegetation removal, and not allowed to drain the land from the adjacent stream into the stream. It has to drain away from that. So now that gets into details of where the ground has to be graded and how you design. Now, the bottom line is we're always into how do you have the best playable golf for every level of player. I mean, I'm thinking about Dustin Johnson and Rory McIlroy and Tiger Woods in designing every course, but I'm also thinking about how the average player plays, how high handicapper plays, how young people play, how because it's important to tie in the details for all levels of players. So there's so many vast elements, and that's what makes it fun and exciting. And everyone is different. Every site, every location, and then you get into uh, external issues, environment, whether it's wind. I'm doing a new golf course in Barbuda, down in the Caribbean, and the prevailing breezes are the number one design factor there. Now it's oceanfront, it's beautiful, it's setting, it's flat and a little boring in that sense, but we're going to take that and build low profile lake and natural areas and create uh, environmental holding basins to make sure that nothing for the environment around it, the reefs around the ocean, uh, and so all the things that golf brings with it, with maintenance and fertilizers, and even though they're organic in most cases, we have to protect the environment around the golf and those kind of things. So there's a lot of pieces, and there's not a checklist, but because every location and area becomes a very different area. So, and again, that's what makes it fun that every golf course becomes unique, distinctive, one of a kind. That's one of my philosophies, going back to the question you asked. Well, how do we do? Well, what's the programming? Well, one that you've never seen before. And I've done many golf courses with 36 holes, two different golf courses, sometimes built at the same time, sometimes 2 to 3 or 5 years later. And the goal is within that environment have a very different type of golf course and playability for no other reason than interest. I was lucky enough to do 3 golf projects on the near Hilton Head, right on the main road going into Hilton Head in South Carolina. Great golf state, South Carolina. Great golf environment with so many courses. So there happened to be 36 holes on each property. Now, this is over about a 25-year period of those projects being completed. But so it's 6 golf courses, 2 on each project. There are 6 different golf courses there. They don't look alike. You would think maybe a different designer designed them because I had another personal goal for that reason, and that evolved into that. How that happened for me, since I was not a world person. Not that I'm against the world, I'm for the world, but I didn't want to have to work. The biggest challenge and negative of my business and career is my work is out of town. I have to travel. I only can do a few golf courses wherever where I live. And so that means you have to leave town. That means your wife and kids are home and you're gone. So that was the biggest challenge and probably the most difficult part of my business that I'm in. So I figured a way to do that the best I could. Well, I'd look at the map and I decide, well, where do I live? Uh, and let's take a line and strike it up right up the Mississippi River that kind of segments the country. And obviously, from north to south, and if you pick those directions, they're only an hour or two from the center point that you can go. And then when we had children, we actually moved to the middle of North Carolina in the western part near Asheville, Hendersonville, a little town. And if you draw a circle around that area, you can go anywhere within about 2.5 hours. So I did something that it related to my personal life and how I could work that in the earlier days of my career, and I'm sure my father and uncle, they were gone by this time. They would have never believed it and they would have probably been against it. But I bought an airplane. An airplane. I couldn't afford it. I could not. It was like stupid. Like, why would you do that? And I was in debt to do that. But I knew that could bring me home. It could make my business work where I can I would take my kids. Now, it wasn't a big, expensive airplane. And of course, I didn't fly it. I had a pilot, but but it was enough that I could take my kids to school in the morning, drop them off at 8 o'clock, go to the airport, spend the day, fly to Hilton Head, fly to Augusta, fly to Atlanta or South Florida or Pennsylvania or Michigan, and be back home for dinner that night. Or more importantly, the dinner was soccer games, football games, basketball games, dance recitals, all those things that we had children within a 10-year period. So they were clustered together. And I just didn't want to leave. I didn't want to. I want to be a part of that. And I had a question that I asked uh, a lot of people, and because over my career, I've had the chance to work for a lot of very influential people, kind of as you do, and talk to a lot of different people. And I usually have asked them the same question, and it was related to what would you do over again if you could do it over again. To me, that's a very important part. And I do that even my own business. When I look at a golf course and I finish it and I get my staff and we talk about it, say, what should we have done? What could we have done? What did we miss? How do we make it better? Because it's always about the next one. It's about tomorrow and about the future. So this question I'd ask, what would you do over again if you could? And especially with extremely successful, even well-known people, most of the almost to everyone would have an answer like, if I could, I would have spent more time with my family. I'd have made, if I could give up some of that, the financial resource that I made and give it up, some of it made, and spend more time with my family, that's what I would do. So I got that so many times. So I decided I'm gonna take heed to that, and I'm gonna figure that one out. And that helped me because I really did not miss much. I couldn't be home all the time. You have a business, you have clients, you have people you have to work for, and did have to go out of town, and I would program it. I'd go out of town and maybe be out of town Tuesday night and Wednesday night, and that would allow me to work 3 days a week out of town and only be away 2 nights. But if Tuesday night was a major sports night or dance recital night or piano night, I would go to Wednesday, Thursday, or whatever. So and I had another personal thing, a little quirk for me, especially when we evolved into having a weather channel. I mean, my early career didn't have a weather channel, but then now we have a weather channel, and have for many decades. But I turned the weather channel on earlier in the week or by the weekend to see where's the H going to be. I only look for H's, and H's are high pressure system, which means it's clear and not bad weather. The L's are a good place to stay away from, especially in the winter times, because that's rain, maybe snow, sleet. The low pressure areas are weather related. So I would plan my weeks. Now, since I worked for myself, I was the boss. I could do that. It wasn't that I could, and I would get with my clients and evaluate that. So that was my personal quirks of how I ran my business to do it to fit my family. And I've always told my employees, you put your family first. If you don't put your family first and your wife's not happy, nobody's going to be happy. So figure that out. Your job, we can make the job work. A job is very important, and to be successful, somewhat important. But all that success is not going to do you much good without a family and without a personal life to that you're happy. You have a relationship with your friends, family, and people. So we can work out the details. Maybe you can't go to that meeting next week. That's important because your daughter is in the school play or whatever. That's important. I don't care how important the meeting is. There's nothing generally that's that important that can't be adjusted. We'll figure it out of how to get it done. So that's again, I'm rambling a little bit, but that's kind of the pieces for me of how I evolved into all those adjustments that make the business work.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, Tom. The show is called Life Excellence, and Life Excellence for me is about excellence in every area of life. And if you have an excellent career and you're doing great and you're successful in your career, but you don't have that same level of success at home, then I guess I would question how successful, at least by my definition, someone is. So I admire you for that. I applaud you for that. I appreciate you sharing that. That has nothing to do with golf, but it has everything to do with what's important in life. And I admire that you molded your life around your career. And I have a couple questions around that. So, when did you first do that? When did you come to the realization that maybe you were going outside the lines of that and had to start to define that a little more clearly and
Well,
create those boundaries?
I'm
And
not sure, I'd have to really do a study about that to find out when, but interesting enough for me, and my wife gets a little upset when I say this, but it's true in the sense of the timing. When I was 30 years old when I got married in 1975, and uh, and one of the if you look back again on the business and financial life of where we were in 1975, and if you go back a few months earlier in the fall of 1974, we had a major economic recession in the country that affected real estate, which affected golf development. And so we had a crash, a much bigger crash than even the crash of 2007 and 8 with the real estate industry and the golf industry. Kind of the same, but in different timing. And so for me, I didn't travel. There were very few projects. There was no place to go, or no place, nothing to do. So I got married, and that's uh, not just for that reason, but I'm not sure that the economy continued to boom since the 70s. I'm not sure I would have gotten married because I'm not sure my wife, who became my wife, would have sat around and waited for me because I traveled. I was working. I was running a business. I was working for a very difficult taskmaster, my uncle, who expected you to work literally in the early days from daylight to dark, 7 days a week. That's the way you work. That was old school thinking. And that's how you got ahead. And from people who started from the down at the very bottom, that's the way a lot of people. That's how America was built in a lot of cases with people who had to continue to keep working. And so for me, this girl I met, who I really liked, she, we talked about it, and then eventually she gave me an ultimatum. At least this is her side of the story. This, so I'm not too uh, uh, nervous about saying this because she said, if we're not married by next Valentine's Day, this is over. I'm out of here. And that was in the fall of, in the summer of 74 and 5. And now the real estate market crashed and the golf industry crashed. We have no projects. I'm staying home, not traveling, and I'm kind of liking it. And I certainly like her. And I'm thinking, I better do this. She's because if I don't, then I may lose this person. This is like the greatest person I've ever met in my life, and I can't lose her. So we got married in 1975, and again, it was. Looking back now, 47 years, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. Oh, and because I wouldn't have these great children, I wouldn't have the home life and the family life and all the other. I'd have a business. Who knows? Probably, maybe would have made more money. Who knows? Maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe you never know. But it worked out pretty well for me, and that was a very important part of my life. And it also maybe I was happier having this family life, the business life and golf. I love, uh, but I also have always said, as I mentioned it, and I've told my staff, if your job interferes with if your job and business interfere with your family, change your job, change your thinking. Because family is the number one important thing. Because you can always get a new job, and you think you love what you're doing. I use the analogy: I love my job. I never would change. I never would leave. Okay, suppose I offered you a job making twice that you're making. Would you change jobs? And people say, oh, well, maybe twice. And if you're not sure, how about if I offer you 3 times what you're making? Would you change jobs? And if the answer is yes, well, obviously it is about, that financial commitment that you feel is necessary for you. But you can change your family, and we have lots of issues of people with breaking up of marriages and relationships and good relationships starting again. I mean, I'm not that person that can solve those problems. All I know is me personally, what I did, how I did it, why I did it. It worked for me, uh, and it's a great, it's a God. I call it the God thing. It just worked out for me, and I did those things, and it just happened, and that's where it evolved to. So, but I look back at that, and that's how, for me, it was an important part of my business career.
Well, that's terrific. I think we could spend the entire rest of the show talking about life design. And maybe I'll have you back on the show because your philosophy around life is very much in sync with mine. And you have 6 children and 17 grandchildren, and you obviously live that philosophy. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. So I appreciate you sharing that. I do want to get back to golf course design a little
Sure.
bit. You mentioned earlier, Tom, that you like to design courses for guys like Justin and Rory, and on the other hand, um, design courses that make it enjoyable for duffers like me. It seems incredibly challenging to do both of those things, and yet you do it. And I think that's part of the challenge for all golf course architects. How do you design courses though for both extremes? Something that's going to be challenging on a PGA Tour stop, and then also challenging for a foursome of 25 handicap golfers on a Saturday.
Well, I don't think it's not a trick. It's not secret for me. By the way, there's one other thing that happened just in what we've been talking about. It's number 18 at grandchildren now. A new one came along not too long ago, so I'm up to 18 grandchildren.
Oh, congratulations! All right.
So,
I had a
well,
feeling when I said 17 that maybe I was off because you do have several children, and you're in that stage of life. So congratulations, and I stand corrected. 18.
when you mentioned, it makes people nervous when you say you design golf courses for Rory and for, or at least that level and skill level of player. And mainly part of that is, it's important. It's equally important that if you take a golf club or anywhere, it doesn't even have to be a club per se, it could be a public municipal facility. Uh, the chances of that golf course having a PGA Tour or a major event of any type are very, very slim and very, we have roughly over 16,000 golf courses in the continental United States. So there's only the PGA Tour and the so-called Corn Ferry Tour and the Senior Tour and the ladies different tours only add up to maybe a couple of hundred golf tournaments a year. So these are all the best players, and take all the college players, and so you maybe come up with a couple thousand. Well, we have millions and millions of people playing golf, so it's important for looking at how does everyone play. But the most important part, and because of in design, first of all, on the mechanics of it, a golf course starts at the back tee in terms of grading, in terms of environment, in terms of setup of a golf hole, whatever that back tee may be. Now, those back tees have been extended 20%, 10, 20, 30% in the last several decades from in terms of percentage of distance. Uh, but just a very basic thing is from a visibility and a positioning of contours and elevations, that's where you have to start from. So that's a starting point. And obviously, the green is the finishing point. Now you have this piece of land to fill in. So just kind of an exercise. If I were to explain it to a person that didn't even play golf of what that evolves to, that would relate to things like that starting and finishing point. And now you have from far right to far left to fill in the spaces. What should those spaces be? Now, we have palettes of environments based on locale, based on whatever the the setting and the piece of property may be, whether it's oceanfront or desert landscape. So it's important that each piece and environments fill in those spots. And the most important position becomes a very simple, basic form that I use. Where are the hazards? What are hazards? Hazards are anywhere that's not fairway, that's reasonably flat or very shortcut grass. And then where's the immediate area after that fairway? Maybe the semi rough, and then the edges outside, far left, far right, and maybe the angle of the green and where the hazards around the green. So now you have a list of basics, but there are endless possibilities of where hazards could be. The more hazards you have, the harder it is. The less hazard you have, obviously easy, very basic. But the golfer, like the elite player who's playing in the fact tees, they play golf in the air mostly. They play golf from the time they hit a golf ball and that ball is traveling in the air and hits the ground. It may roll 5 or 10 yards or 15, depending on if it's wet, it's going to roll no place. It just hits and stops. If it's wet, dry, it may a few yards. So assuming a hole is, let's assume it's 500 yards, a par four from way back. Now that used to be a par five, but today it's a par four for the elite players. For the rest of us and club players and public golf players, that's still a par five. But in terms of numbers, that distance and from the next tees forward, depending again on where the club is and who's designing the golf hole and what it is, you may move up as far as 150 yards from that 500-yard tee to be 350 yards for, let's call it, a middle teeing ground, and maybe even 20 to 30 yards forward. That would be a forward tee position. And again, they used to be determined ladies and men. Well, now it's not designated, and not for social reasons, not designation. It's more that we have different levels of golfers, and we have very proficient lady golfers who play farther back than we do have forward tee players that maybe are beginners or whatever. So now it's not about uh, gender. It's more about the type of player that you are. We have these different positions, so that uh, depending where you're playing from. Now, the important part is based on those tees. Where does that player miss the golf ball? For me, it's important. Where do they miss it? Because generally they're not hitting the middle of the fairway. That's the easy part. So you start looking at how much and how difficult should those hazards be, including vegetation becomes a major hazard. Obviously, water and those types of environment. We have a lost ball. You can have a lost ball in vegetation as well. And if you have a high level or a large number of that on both left and right of the hole, for a errant golfer or errant ball player, you can lose a lot of golf balls. So you start defining and detailing each one of those specifics as to where and what placement of the hazards. Now, one of the things we've evolved to, again, going back to those decades I talked about earlier, of what is a golf hole, our ultimate goal is for a golfer to stand on the tee and look at the golf hole before they even play it and say, wow, wow, look at this golf hole. This is as good a golf hole as I've ever seen. Now that used to be called a signature hole to some degree. Well, we've evolved to every hole is a wow or a signature hole because that's the competition. That's what expectations that we have evolved to in golf. It goes back again to what I said earlier about these expectations. So, having said that, uh, the more elements of change or variety you have in that golf hole, it's kind of like looking at a painting. When you start looking at a painting, and a very important part of the painting, in a general way, not necessarily to an old time, very famous painter, but what's the frame on the painting? What's the frame doing for you? It's really creating that uh, definition. Same way with a golf hole. What's the frame on the picture you're looking at? And then the details that are filled in for each individual player. Where are the hazards? How deep? How steep? How dense? All those factors work into that. And now you have to do it 18 times. So you have to. It's a puzzle. It's And then it's personal choice. And that's why some golf courses, if you look, arguably Pine Valley Golf Club in southern New Jersey is considered by all, in all the rankings as maybe one of the maybe the best in the world. It has that style. And if you look at a frame, you look at a picture, and if I showed you 18 pictures of that and you could show your audience those 18 pictures, you'd say, well, that, and if they never been there, you'd say, it's the hardest golf course I've ever seen because they have it's a sand-based soil and it's sand in front of the tee. It's sand on the right. It's sand on the left. There's sand every place. And now the degree, what makes it great is the playability, the challenge for all levels of golfers. It's probably a little bit too hard for a real high handicap player, but that's a very unique place. So again, it's a long-winded answer, but how we do it for each level of player. But it's extremely important that we give people a place to play and enjoy and have fun, and hopefully not lose multiple golf balls.
Yeah. Well, I'm still working on that last part. I have all the other things down pretty well. I'm still trying to play with fewer balls, but it's a wonderful challenge. That you had mentioned that today versus in the past, every hole is a signature hole, or that's the level of expectation that's been created. Is that expectation created by golfers, by the golf community, or is that within your profession that designers are trying to constantly raise the bar, and so they want to create those 18 signature holes rather than say two or three holes on a course?
Well, it's a combination of all the above. And I say that one of my opinions would be that the golf ranking system, this so called top 100, top 200s, best in the world, top 100 in the world, the top 10 in the state, we have all these rankings. And and in the last 30, 40, 50 years, again, multiple decades since I started, we have these comparisons. It's kind of what we do in America, for example, and it's around the world, of course. But it's a gauging rating system, and we keep coming up with uh, those types of things. So. That's an important part. How do you get recognized? How it also gets to economics of what your goal is and what your market and who you're trying to appeal to. And so all that has evolved to that point. Now, again, one of the pieces on the playability side, the challenge becomes how do you do that and create all that drama? Let's call it drama relative to the visuals, which would continue on to the playability. But how do you do it and not make it too difficult and too hard? Now we have another factor that we're moving into as well, and it's always been a piece of it, but it's gotten more so in the last few decades. The economics of maintaining that and taking care of a golf course, which relates to the end user and it relates to the price. What does it cost for that one round of golf to be played? Golf, as we know, is not an inexpensive sport, and a lot has to do with location. A lot has to do with the economics to produce that product for someone to play. Now, we've also evolved into this acceptance level of perfection. And how many times have you heard someone say, well, the bunkers, the sand is not consistent. In one hole it's firm, in one hole it's soft, in one hole it's this. Well, to some degree, in the old days and the way things used to be, and certainly back when economic times weren't as good, it, the answer would be, well, that's a hazard. No hazard's supposed to be consistent. It's a penalty location. But then we've evolved to, like, for example, the PGA Tour, because that PGA Tour is controlled by the PGA Tour Association, and they want consistency in the bunkers because the players go from week to week playing their game, and it makes sense that we've evolved into that. But as you've noticed, what is one of the most easiest shots for PGA Tour events? Sand, hitting a ball out of a sand close to the hole. We all marvel at how good they are, but for them, it's not that hard of a shot. And so, little pieces like that are very important. And the detail again goes back to that level of of hazard placement becomes the impact for the golf hole.
Do you ever get along the lines of playability and difficulty of holes? Do you ever the phone rings and you pick it up and it's a Tour Pro PGA or LPGA and they say, Tom, you know, I just played this course as you know last weekend and hole number 13. What in the world were you thinking and sort of questioning the design of that?
I may not get the call on the phone, but I certainly would talk to them somewhere along the way. And if it happened to be a hole where it didn't work out for them too well and it cost them maybe a championship, obviously it goes to the highest level. Yes. And there's discussions. That's the unique thing about golf design and the fact that there are very few rules. There are almost no rules in golf design. Now, when I say there are no rules in golf, the United States Golf Association and Royal and Ancient wouldn't like me saying that because obviously they control the that part of the game. But I refer to it as design. There are endless possibilities, and if you find a golf hole, let's say it's a new golf hole somewhere. Now, I'm not defending my work or my position or my industry, but I would say this in the sense of since there's so many golf environments throughout the world, you could have a golf hole that you don't like, that you played in for some reason it didn't fit your eye or whatever, or you didn't like the setup. There's a very good chance that I could find the equivalent to that golf hole, almost duplicated on some of the finest golf courses in the world that you would have played, could go play, and you'd have the same golf hole, and you wouldn't have the same feeling about it. It's some of it's so perception. It's about us. And I think we do that in life as well. We have this judgment that we put on something that we get in our brain, and we're stuck with it. And whatever it is, and it's about us. It's about me, me, me. I say get over it. You know, just it is what it is. You go play it. Everybody's playing the same hole. And yes, you want to blame me. Okay, I'll take the blame, but just move on. It's a game. It's a
Well,
game.
that's why and that's why I said the phone call because it strikes me as sort of a knee-jerk reaction that you know, geez, they're sort of bugged by something that happened in their round, and if you ask them about it a month later, maybe they wouldn't feel the same way. Tom, one of the things that absolutely fascinates me is your ability and the ability of designers in your profession to look at, as I stated earlier, at this blank canvas and to be able to create some of the just absolute beautiful masterpieces that you and your colleagues have created around the world. I imagine you're inspired by golf courses designed by other architects and by courses that you've designed in the past. But I'm curious, do you also draw inspiration externally? So, inspiration that's completely outside the golf world? And if so, where does that come from?
You know, for me, I don't believe I do that, and generally, maybe it's the way I grew up. Maybe I'm not sure because I get asked that question in different ways, and I think about it. I generally don't go see other golf courses. You know, in my particular case, since and especially moving on to the age that I am, the only thing that not only, but the most important thing to me is time. Uh, I really, uh, sounds a little crass, but I really don't need more friends. I don't need another house. I don't need more cars or an airplane. I've got everything I need. When I don't have enough of is time. And so it's important for me to take the time that I have. And so it's not about going to other places and looking at other things to get new ideas. I think my brain has always been as such that it's the challenge that's automatically comes to me. Think out of the box. Think uh, it's not what you've ever done. Don't even talk about this is what we did here or did here, and we can do that. Now, I grew up in an era where, and if golf design, when you look at it again, going back to America, how did we get started in golf design in America? Well, we had a few people that brought Scottish people from Scotland, where the game was modern. Let's say the modern game in the last 200 years uh, has evolved, and you brought these fellas who the Donald Ross and the Mackenzies and different people who had these wonderful ideas, and they took the ideas from what they saw of links land and how golf evolved from a property that just evolved, where some grass was cut and some vegetation was removed and some area was moved, and this game kind of evolved that kind of way. So they came to America and produced some of the things that they saw and were a part of in the early stages. And Donald Ross did that at Pinehurst in the early or late 1890s, and right around 1900, and built many golf courses there. And he did several, maybe 300 or 400 he's credited with in the U.S. And his style of golf and what he believed golf should be from what he learned. And I think we've all evolved from that with many other early designers. But for me, uh, for my career, and again, the fact that my uncle was this golf tournament player and he had a vision of how he played golf, and that's how I learned the game from a golfer, and how you execute and play, and then again having no other resources other than we have a piece of land that we're going to go put a golf course on it, and we have limited resources. How do you remove vegetation? How do you contour land? And how do you put this puzzle together of 18 golf holes in different lengths and forms and have it accepted in the marketplace? I mean, it's a very simple, basic kind of thing for me, and it just kept evolving. And we only had limited resources to build it. And literally, in round numbers, like $10,000 a hole was a budget for golf when I started. And it seems like yesterday, but that today we have golf courses where we'll spend over $1 million a hole based on the environment, based on the location. Now, you would not have built a golf course in the 1960s on land that we do today in a lot of locations, because there were no, the resources were not there. So that evolved. That's the evolution. How do you get to do that, and how do you learn that process? Well, you do it by execution. In Hawaii, on a project I did for Discovery Land, it was 100% lava rock, and there's been a lot of golf courses a lot of other architects have done on lava rock. Well, what do you do about that? Well, what you do, the first thing you need to do is take a bulldozer and walk it over the lava to break off the edges of the sharp uh, pieces that dried from the wet lava that flowed, so you can walk on it, because you can't even walk on it. You'd fall down and scrape and and bruise and cut yourself all over. And now from that, you have to rip it and you have to move it and adjust it. That's extremely expensive. And I'm not sure I could have done that in my earlier career. There's a lot of golf I could not have done. Shadow Creek in 1989. In 1963, the first golf course I worked on for my uncle in 1964. There's no way that I would have the expertise to do that. It would have been, and no one else would have done it, I don't think, including an owner. You don't go to Las Vegas and take a boring, flat, ugly piece of land and overnight have something that knocks your socks off and say, this is maybe as good as anything I've ever seen. That's exactly what Shadow Creek evolved to. That came for me from an education over time, and then having the right person to say, a little quick story of how that evolved. This person said to me that he wanted to create a golf course as good as any in the world, and his family, his business was in Las Vegas, and that's where he wanted it to be because that's where he was. And my first line was, well, what you're talking about, and if you look at any he asked me a question no one ever asked me. No interview person, no golf writer. Very basic, simple question. I'm shocked that I was never answered. Never thought about it. But what makes a golf course great? Isn't that an interesting question? Well, I, I almost didn't know how to answer it, because I was thinking I had to think about it. What does make a golf course great for all the golfers out there? Yeah, put that in your brain. What makes a good? What is your definition? And there's so many different possibilities. There's so many different ideas. Usually, it's a piece of land. The first basic thing is, if you have a great piece of land, you should have a great golf course. You have a bad piece of land, you got a big job to do. So now if you have so my answer to him was, Usually, a great golf course relates to a great environment, whether it's an ocean, whether there are mountains, whether there's streams, whether there's vegetation, some type of environment. And I said, this land does not have any environment, doesn't have an environment. And he said, well, why don't we build an environment and put a golf course in it? Very interesting. Build an environment and put a golf course in it. Next response from me right out of the box, of course, goes back to my upbringing and background. Do you know what that's going to cost? I didn't know it was going to cost. I just said that. And he said, that's not your job. He said, that's my job. Your job is to think. This guy gave me, this person was Steve Wynn, who created many of the great environments in Las Vegas and buildings. And the guy is brilliant,
Sure.
great ideas. And he said to me, let's, let's you think about it because you're the artist and don't think about my part of the job, paying for it. You just figure out how to do it and don't worry about it. I never had that happen. So that's in the now that's I'm in the business my career of 25 years and this happens. And it was a game changer. It changed, I think it changed golf in a sense of we learned how to, and the industry evolved to how do you build great golf without having an environment for golf. And I think as we move into future sites, and even because of our goal and desire and rules and regulations to protect existing environments, to protect existing land and wetlands and vegetation, we, the industry of golf designers, have evolved into that and understand and can do a better and can do a job doing that because it isn't about. So again, people ask me, where would you like to design a golf course? And usually most people would think about or Scotland and Ireland or the sand hills of Nebraska or Australia or other places. My answer is now, and I would love to do it. It's one of my long-term goals. The answer is the Mall of America parking lot. That's my dream place to do a golf course. What is the Mall of America parking lot? I've never been in the Mall of America, but I know what it is. It's blacktop. It's poles with lights on them, and it's big drains with grates on them to take the water surface off all this blacktop. Now, to me, wouldn't that be a great, exciting place to build a world class, one of a kind, best you ever seen golf course? I think that's what I like.
If anybody can do it, you can do it. And I have been to the Mall of America, and so maybe for the first time ever in either of our lives, I have a vision for something that you haven't quite taken the time to consider yet. But that would be terrific. Tom, your career, I suspect, at the core comes from your love of the game of golf. What is it that you love about golf? And what advice do you have for golfers, whether they're scratch golfers or 20 handicap golfers, about how to maximize their experience, how to maximize their enjoyment from a round of golf?
I think that, I go back again to my earlier career, and the question for me is, did I just grow up in it and automatically accepted it and was forced to it because I had nothing else that I did? It was kind of a family thing. My wife became a golfer. The first 38 years we were married, she didn't play golf, and she's an artist, and she's a great mother and involved in charities and all kinds of things. And it's interesting when uh, after our last child left the house, she said to me, and she's a little bit of a bizarre person as well, so let's take that with a grain of salt, what I'm going to say. Uh, she says, Tom, I think we either have to get divorced or I'm going to have to start playing golf. And I thought, what did you say? And she said, I think we have to get divorced or I'm going to stay playing golf because you're always on a golf course and you're traveling, you're doing this and that, and I don't play golf. Maybe, we've got to think about that. Let's talk. I thought, oh, I don't want to talk about it. That's like, first of all, the immediate answer is, I'd like you to start playing golf. It'd be a lot cheaper if you just played golf. That would be better for me as well. So she started playing golf. And within a short period of time, she gave me a little bit more insight into what golfers, like most people, accept and why they do it. She loves it. She's addicted to it. It got her in her soul, her brain. She says it's the greatest game ever. Now, I would have never guessed she could say that. I never even thought that would happen. So, again, I didn't affect me the same way. That's not the way I felt. I accepted because that's who I am. I've been in golf, never done anything else, and love it. I mean, it's in me. I don't know how to explain it, but she explained it to me what it means. A, to be outdoors. B, to have the game is you against that golf hole or the golf ball, and you can't get your brain to take the club and do what you want it to do or what your brain's telling it to do, and your body's doing something else. And then how do you accept failure because you didn't do very well and you hit that ball in the water and you had a very easy shot and you know you can do it. And again, it's all the principles. There's so many life lessons there, and not being frustrated, not being upset and mad, and enjoying something that you have. And maybe this is the best you're going to be. And that's the way it goes. But you always have the desire and you always have the opportunity to improve. So through lessons, again, it's attitude. Attitude becomes a major force. So I think there's so many life lessons in the game of golf. And I see that. And again, I didn't understand it per se until I got it from her of understanding. And I think that is what I like about it so much. I mean, I just am, golf is my life, other than my family, of course, but that is what I do. And I just take it for granted because it's so much fun and takes you to so many great places.
Well, it's a wonderful game, and I would agree with everything you said about your wife's description of what makes golf so great. And the other thing that stands out for me is if I can go out and have an enjoyable time on a beautiful course and play halfway decent, but then hit those one or two really good shots. So that long putt or that chip from just off the green, or maybe a nice shot out of the sand trap. For me, it gives me hope. Like maybe I can get better at this game if I just invest a little more time, if I practice a little more. So it's always nice to have. For me, it's those one or two good shots. Now, of course, for professionals, if they don't want the one or two shots that aren't good in the entire round, but it's a different perspective. The great thing about golf is everybody can play it at all levels, everybody can enjoy it, and everybody can marvel at the types of courses that you've created. And so we appreciate you for that. One last question, and this might be a twist on the who's your favorite child question, but Tom, what two or three courses are you most proud of, and what causes you to feel that way? Maybe if I asked you, what are of the 200, what are the two or three courses that I absolutely need to play if I really want to get a sense of what Tom Fazio's golf courses are like?
Well, again, that is definitely a hard question for me, because I've been so fortunate to have so many great environments and so many great people to work for and locations. I would, if you, when you asked me that, I would wind up uh, having a discussion with you and talking you into accepting my answer in different than what you had expected to be. And that would, well, I think I'd like to, what kind of environments do you like? Do you like the desert? Do you like ocean? Do you like mountains? Do you like hilly topography? Because I've have so many golf courses I've done in different environments. And for me, I like them all. So I would give you two or three of each one of those environments. And then I'd get you to say, which state do you live in? Well, I've got a couple there, a couple nearby. Here's a couple. I'd wind up, and then I'd say, I'll tell you what, if you're really going to press me and push me, I'm going to write down 75 golf courses that I've done. I'm going to write them down and I'm going to put the names on them and I'm going to put them in a hat. And I'm going to stake my reputation on any one of those two or three you pick. And that's the ones you should go see. And my brain, see, that's the way my brain works. I can't just go to one place. It's interesting for me. Every day, my brain is thinking about golf holes, golf courses that I'm currently designing, and what my staff and I are working on golf courses that I've done in the past, uh, maybe the immediate past, ones that I've done decades ago, all day long. I drive down the road and I see a setting, and so that reminds me of a course in Waynesboro in Philadelphia that I did in 1964, or in Pinehurst, it's 1976. And I remember all these golf courses. Uh, and one little piece of that, uh, because of, I get asked a question like that, I thought about I'd come up with my 18 favorite, because that relates to not just individual holes. And it wasn't about 18 favorite holes or 18 favorite um, individual greens or whatever. I came set one morning and my 18 favorite clients that I worked for. And it wasn't even about the property. It wasn't my 18 favorite properties. And so I started writing down,
Mhm.
because that's where it starts. You have to work for, when you work for someone with some, that phone call, going back to that phone call, and how do you get involved in a project, and what are the constraints and the environments for doing the project. So I started writing down my 18 favorite, and I started in the decades. I went to, because that's how my brain could work. And I can tell you where I worked and what year and what decade and what golf courses. So I started uh, writing them down by decades. Well, it turned out I got up to 74 names. 74 names by the time I came to current day. Now I'm how going to, well, and then I start going through them. Well, how am I going to take this person out? How am I going to take that person out? Most of them became very personal, good friends of mine. Unfortunately, a lot of them passed because I was a lot younger than them, especially in those early days. Now my clients are younger than me in a lot of cases. So uh, it's interesting, but again, I don't think I gave you an answer to your question, but that's the way I would answer it, because I can't. I just don't have that kind of brain that picks a favorite, because I've been lucky and blessed to have so many that you pick it. I'll give you the list, you pick it, and I'll stand by it.
Well, the good news is we have lots of wonderful, wonderful choices. Tom, thanks so much for being on the show today. It's been great having you. I'm hoping to get up to treetops this summer in northern Michigan, and I'll certainly think of you when I do.
I have lots of stories there for you as well. It'd be great, great. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you again.
I enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with Tom Fazio on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at brianbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams, hit them straight, and make each day your masterpiece.